Earlier this year, I went to Daytona Bike Week. I'm sure the vast majority of you guys know exactly what Daytona Bike Week is, but for those of you not in the know, Daytona Bike Week is the biggest, most well-known, most notorious bike week here in the US, and every year thousands and thousands and thousands of riders descend on Daytona Beach for just an entire week of absolute mayhem. Typically when you think bike week, you think a bunch of Harleys, and that is predominantly what it is, and as much as I wanted to bring my Rebel 1100, it just wasn't in the cards this year. I actually got the chance to ride an Indian FTR the entire time. So the whole time that I was at Bike Week, I was on an Indian, I was surrounded by a bunch of other people riding Indians, and of course I was surrounded by a bunch of Harleys at Bike Week. And as I'm sitting here reflecting on just how fun the trip was, how crazy it was, there's an idea that kind of keeps popping in my head, and that idea is just the fact that being around all of those Indians and all of those Harleys really showed me what I think is a big issue with the Rebel 1100. So let's hop on the 1100, go for a quick little ride, and I'll fill you guys in on what that big issue that I found is, and fingers crossed that we can even get anywhere, because through the magical mystery door you can see traffic is not looking good. The Bay Bridge is miles down that way, and it is still pretty much dead stop through here and all the way down there. So hopefully we can get anywhere, but subscribe if you're new here. Let's jump straight into it. Okay, so like I was saying, earlier this year I had the chance to go to Bike Week, and I actually went with the owner of NBT, Nick, and he has two different Indian FTRs, one of which they're doing a giveaway for over on NBT. So because I couldn't bring my Rebel 1100, I got the chance to ride the giveaway FTR, which I absolutely loved. And because he's in so close with all the Indian guys, of course, throughout lots of the week that we were there, we were hanging out with a bunch of the Indian dudes. And of course, like I said, Bike Week is just known for a bunch of Harley stuff. And honestly, I think that was probably the most time that I've ever spent, like, just so, I guess, like, ingrained in, like, the Harley and Indian culture. And I'm not saying this is, like, clickbait, but it really showed me this like weird issue with the Rebel 1100 that I think I had realized before, but it had never like fully set in, you know? So between all these Indian and Harley shows that we went to, and just all like the chaos, all the events, all the people that we were hanging out with, I couldn't help but notice just how much craftsmanship went into all of these bikes and just how customized they were, especially the Harleys. I mean, there's just crazy builds, $75,000, $80,000 lowrider ST builds, just absolute madness. And it felt like every bike that you looked at, while lots of them had the same characteristics, none of them looked the same, you know? They were all like super unique in their own way. And like even the Indians that we were riding, if you haven't watched the video yet, go check out the review that I did about the FTRs, and you'll see Nick's full carbon FTR that I rode. And the thing that kind of struck me is I'm looking at his bike before I rode it, and it's full carbon. I mean, it has carbon fiber bits all over it, has a carbon fiber tank, the whole 9 yards, and I'm like, man, this is super badass. Like, where did you get all these carbon fiber pieces? And he's like, they're actually OEM Indian pieces. Like, I got them from the Indian dealer. And I was like, what the hell? How? Damn, it's windy. And I'm like, what the hell? How are these all OEM pieces? And he's like, yeah, dude, I know, it's dope. Like, they even have different patterns in the carbon fiber. And then at one point we went to like a Harley show, you know, like one of the ones where there's just bikes everywhere and they give out awards for like best of certain categories and everything like that. And some of the builds were just insane, man. It's just crazy how many different aftermarket parts there are. Are you gonna come over? I'll let you, but you gotta do it. There's just crazy, like, how many different aftermarket companies support it, and like even Indians. There was a company that came from somewhere overseas, I want to say Germany maybe, but they came up and they were talking to us, and apparently they do a lot with just, I guess, Indian builds in general, but I think a lot of like the Chiefs and stuff like that. And they came from overseas to like come to Bike Week and kind of like, I don't know, put their name out there a little bit more, whatever. The point is, they're a company that specializes just in aftermarket Indian parts, and their stuff is just crazy. Their builds are nuts, and hanging out with the Indian motorcycle crew is like, you know, you see how much can be done to the FTR, which I kind of talked about in my other video, where it's like, if you want to rally FTR, you can make it. If you want to race FTR, you can make it. There's so many different options, and that's kind of like what really started driving the point home for me while I was on that trip, is just the fact that it's kind of a big issue to me. I don't know about you guys, but there's just not a lot of aftermarket support for the Rebel 1100 as far as mods and customization goes. And like, aftermarket aside, like I was saying, Harley and Indian, both of them have so many options where you can customize the bike from the factory that even if there's not aftermarket support, it doesn't matter. You can make the bike your own. And don't get me wrong, I feel like I've personally, not to toot my own horn, but I've helped kind of like push the bar with the Rebel 1100 as far as like what kind of customization you can do, and like, you know, like the risers that I have on there. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I actually have 6-inch pullback risers now. Before I had just the 6-inch straight up risers, but like those aren't even designed for the Rebel. They're designed for a Harley, and I had to figure out all this stuff with how to mount the speedometer and how to even get the adapter bolts to attach it. Damn, traffic is serious. Speaking of Indians, what's going on? No wave, but he was looking at it. I'll take it. And as much as like I've tried to help push the capabilities of modding these things, it's just kind of hard when it feels like the aftermarket almost doesn't even take it serious. For example, I have the El Cheapo eBay seat on here, which has been fine enough, you know, more comfortable than stock, but it's not like crazy quality by any means. But like, obviously the holy grail seats are Saddlemen seats. Everybody who does like their club style Dynas or like any nice Harleys, Saddlemen is always the way to go. And in fact, Saddlemen actually made some custom one-off seats for the Burley brand Rebel 1100 when they like released it, and they were showing off all the parts for Burley brand. So that kind of gave me hope, like, oh, Saddlemen might make a seat for this bike, but they just haven't come out with it. And I've DM'd them on Instagram and maybe emailed them a couple times, and I know a few other people on the forums have. But one of the events that I was at, they had a booth set up, so I went over there and talked to them, and I'm like, hey man, what do I need to do to get you guys to take the Rebel 1100 serious and to get you guys to make a nice seat for it? Like, I love what you guys make. I have one of your seats on my Grom. What do I have to do to make it happen? And he's like, oh man, there's just not a market for it. We're not gonna do it. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I'm like, I forget what the exact stat is, but I think I have like over 100,000 views between all of my videos talking about all the seats that I've tried on this bike, most of which suck. I'm like, I think my views kind of say otherwise, you know? I have over 100,000 views of people looking up seats for this bike, and all the stuff that I've tried has not been great. Like, people are looking. And he's like, nah, it's just not there. I'm like, okay, well, what do I need to do to prove to you that people want a seat for these bikes? Like, how many people do I need to say, yes, I'm gonna get a seat in order for you guys to put it into production? And he was like, 2,000. And I went, okay, 2,000, cool. And like 2,000 sold over how long of a time period? And he's like, no, I mean, we need 2,000 people prepaid before we even make the mold of the seat or start making it. I'm like, are you high out of your in mind? What do you mean 2,000 people before you even make it? I'm like, there's a bunch of new like Indians and stuff like that. There was one bike in particular, oh god, can't remember what bike it was, but like some new cruiser that had just come out, and they had already had a seat like ready to go for it within months of it being out. And I'm like, so how do you determine stuff like that? Like with that bike, what made you guys go, yeah, we're gonna have a seat made for this bike before we even see how the market reacts to it, versus this bike where I'm showing you, yeah, there's a market. What the f is this guy doing, dude? Where I'm showing you, yeah, there's a market for it, and you're like, nope, there needs to be 2,000 people, you know? And he's like, yeah, just anticipated demand. I'm like, what are they doing up there? Having girl dinner? That's crazy. I tell that story to say it's crazy that, I don't know, this bike has been out. I've had my bike for a little over 3 years. So they started hitting dealers over 3 years ago, and you know, you still can't even get an actual ECU tune for it. DynoJet makes the Power Commander 6, so you have the piggyback fuel tuner, but there's no actual ECU tune where you can help the jerky open close of the throttle, and you can't take off the top speed limiter through an ECU flash. You got to do the roundabout way that I found with the Speedo Healer, and there still aren't like any risers like this other than the ones that I found with the adapters. And if you want forward controls, there's only like maybe 2 aftermarket options, only one of which I would actually consider to be a good option as far as quality and looks are concerned, but then you figure you get a bike from Harley or Indian and you have options from the factory of whether or not you want to take the bike from the factory with forward controls, mid controls, closer reach bars, further reach bars, low bars. And Honda's like, oh hey, you can get some tank pads and a little teeny tiny backrest for the passenger, and how about some heated grips? So it's just yeah, I don't know. I feel like one of the coolest parts for me, damn, it's popping off down here. One of the coolest parts for me with bikes is modifying them and making them your own and making it fit you, whether that's comfort, practicality, or whatever. And there's just so many options from Harley and Indian, whether it's from the factory or whether it's from aftermarket. But with Honda, it's just not there, especially from the factory. And while the aftermarket is slowly catching up for the 1100, I just don't know, I guess, how long it's going to take and what to do for aftermarket companies to start taking the 1100 more seriously. And you know, I've seen like on the forums lots of people, not lots of people, but like a handful of people that have been like, yeah, I sold my 1100 strictly because the aftermarket isn't there yet. There's not enough modifications for me to do to it yet. And I've been the one that's been like, oh dude, it's a new model, it just came out, like give the aftermarket some time, people will get there, like they're gonna love it. But you know, at a certain point it's like, okay, I've been saying that, and then at year 2 I start to believe it less and less, and then at year 3 it's like, all right, what the f is going on? Like, where is all the aftermarket support, you know? And it's getting to a point where like part of me's like, do I just need to, like, is my next direction hard parts for the 1100? Is that what I need to do? I am working with one company for some hard parts for the 1100, and I'm not gonna, like, I don't want to ruin the surprise risers, but like at a certain point, if aftermarket companies are not going to take the 1100 as seriously as they do Harleys and Indians, then maybe it's time for me to either push harder, or maybe it's time for me to make my own hard parts, which I have no idea how to do, but I don't know. Absolute yap fest, but there is my thesis after Bike Week, is just how clear it is that there is so much modification, upgrade, customization support for Harleys and Indians, whether it's OEM or aftermarket. And then the Rebel 1100, like, don't get me wrong, I love the way that it looks, I love what I've done with it, but there just is not as much support for these things as there should be. So with that said, leave a comment below, let me know, I guess, what modifications, what upgrades, what kind of customization you guys want to see companies come out with for the Rebel 1100, and maybe whichever ones get the most likes or is commented the most, that's the companies that I'll kind of push for the hardest. But I'll be honest, like, coming back from Bike Week, part of me is like, you know, like, I kind of have the 1100 where I want it, and now I just need to get an Indian or a Harley and just like really dive into it and really customize it the way that I want. But then the other part of me is like, maybe this is just my sign that I need to be like the brand ambassador that really pushes to get the parts made for these things that we need. Like, part of me is like, why don't I just go frickin' buck wild and take the Rebel 1100, strip it down to the frame, powder coat the frame some crazy color, put an Africa Twin motor in it, make it just like an absolute ripper, like think the Buell Super Cruiser but as an 1100. So yeah, I don't know. Shout out to the Patreon members for making all of this possible. Could not be doing it without you guys. If you guys want to support me through Patreon, it is the biggest and best way that you can help the channel, and of course you also get behind the scenes access, early access to videos, and the Patreon Polaroid series that only Patreon members get. Every video that I film, every trip I go on, even just behind the scenes day-to-day stuff with the bikes, I'm always taking Polaroids just like this one with my Polaroid camera and picking Patreon members at random to send them to. Patreon members have been loving it, and I've sent out almost 50 of them so far this year. If you want to get all these benefits, check out patreon.com/lifeofburch where you can pledge your monthly amount. Otherwise, you can support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I will catch y'all on the next one. Love you guys. Peace.
Oh, so basic. Hope you play this. Damn, I prayed it. Nice song and I became this. Old souls fake it. Paid those placements. Fuck shit. And I'm still waiting on the brighter days. Been a minute, been rough many times more. And I'm kicking rocks to a sky of gray. Praying hard, talk to me before I'm done for.